I've always used the idea of cycle tracking in the more of the energetics because my energy fluctuates a lot during my cycle. But I'm also a manifesting generator. That's something in the human design world that like I get crazy bursts of energy. And then when my energy's kind of coming down in my luteal phase, it's a huge drop. What I'm asking is, are there signs that we need to look for in our menstrual health that we would maybe need support in if there's a huge downside of energy or different things with our menstrual blood that comes to mind when I ask that question?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I was just talking about specifically fertility awareness. I'm obviously very passionate about it. I also suggest adding in barrier methods like a condom, for instance, if you feel comfortable and you want to have sex during your fertile window. There's a lot more to know about it than what I just shared, but the basics are there. When you're tracking your cycle, this is what I love. Like when you're tracking your cycle, whether or not you want to use it for contraception, if you're tracking your cycle, you're getting information. That's what you're kind of alluding to here is like when we track, we can symptom track alongside that. So we're not just checking those signs, we can also track our symptoms. So it could be, like I said before, like paying attention to the blood that's coming out, the menstrual blood that's coming out. It could be your moods. It could be your pain. It could be potentially any kind of soreness that you might have in your breast or chest. It could be bloating. It could be diarrhea. It could be constipation. It's like all of those signs and symptoms are telling us something. A lot of fatigue. It could be depression, anxiety. All of that is telling us something. So absolutely, there are so many things. And actually, it's more than I can really go into here, but I do have a list of signs of imbalance that I want to mention here. And I actually have this also in my guide so that if anybody is interested, they can just go to this list. I have a list of cycle norms and then I have a list of cycle imbalances in there, but I'm just going to go through the imbalances here. And again, that's herbalwomb.com/track your cycle. So short cycles. So short cycles are less than 25 days. So by cycles, I mean from the time you're bleeding all the way till the next time you're bleeding. I'm not talking about your time of your period. I'm talking about like that entire menstrual cycle. So 25 days or less can be a sign of some kind of imbalance happening. Sometimes that can be normal for people, but sometimes that can be an imbalance. So it's something to look at. Long cycles, longer than 35 days, consistently. Occasionally, we're going to have a random weird cycle here and there. That can be completely normal. Even one a year can be completely normal to have one of these weird wonky cycles. But when this is happening consistently, you're like, ooh, oh, it's 37 days again. Oh, it's 41 days. Oh, it's 21 days and like all of that. That's when you want to start paying attention and being like, okay, something's going on here. I actually have a client right now who was just saying, like, she was like, I think my cycles have always been short. She was like, they're 21 days. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting. But she doesn't remember. She was on hormonal birth control her entire 20s into her early 30s. And she doesn't really remember what her cycle was like before that because she was a teenager. And so it's just like hard for her to remember. And so I'm just like, oh, interesting. They're just shorter. She wasn't even tracking till the past few years because now she's trying to conceive. So I think now she's realizing they're short. They may not have been that short. They might have gotten shorter. So it's interesting. It gives us information. And it's also helpful, I will say, to think about what were your cycles like earlier and have they changed? That's another thing to notice. If things are changing, that's something to start paying attention to. And then, of course, like intense PMS. So intense. I mean, some level of mood shifting and changing, fatigue, a little bit of bloating, like just a little bit of cramping, not like intense, you need to be in your bed and you can't go to work type of cramping. Because literally our uterine lining is getting ready to and then shedding. Like it's a thing in our organ that's shedding. So some of us will feel that more than others. It's okay to feel that. But we don't want to be in agony. We don't want to be lying in bed. And certainly if it's longer than just a couple few days, stretching out into like your entire luteal phase and you're noticing like pretty intense pain or irritation, you're having nausea, you're passing out. Like it's so amazing to me now that I've been hearing more and more stories. Just like, wow, some people don't even realize that that's not normal because it's what they've always experienced. So understanding your own body and writing those symptoms down and then sharing them with someone who isn't you so they can kind of like feedback off and be like, oh, that doesn't happen to me. I don't pass out because of my menstrual cramps. I'm not on the floor in my bathroom when I'm bleeding. That's helpful, right? Because some people are just like, this is everybody. So those types of things, anxiety, depression, all of that kind of stuff, especially if it's really intense, because there are even mood disorders that can happen that I think are very often overlooked and important to consider. Significant diarrhea or major constipation. So like if you're really got a lot of loose stools, you're losing a lot. It's very common. It depends on the person, but some people tend towards some loose stools like that first day or two. of their cycle, that can be totally common. The energy's going down in the body, the cramping is happening. Our body is just like, get it all out. That can be a normal feeling. But if it's like really a lot, that could be something to look at. And for sure, if there's like major constipation, especially for like multiple days, it can be kind of normal to have a little bit of slower stool right before you bleed. But if there's like a lot of constipation, that's something to look at too. Cyclic headaches or migraines, like really significant, especially if they're significant. You might have a little headache here or there, but if you're consistently every month having really significant migraines, you're unable to do things, essentially that's saying that there's something imbalanced here. There's some kind of hormonal response we're having that our bodies are not adjusting well to. So figuring that out and just like working with someone, you do not have to suffer through these things. There are things that are possible for you. So those kinds of things. Yeah, like significant cramping, I think I already mentioned, incapacitating pain. Like it's so wild that endometriosis is becoming, of course, more of a trending topic, but there are people with endometriosis who have incapacitating pain that is lasting for, I mean, even if it's just around their menstrual cycle, but they're passing out or they're puking, or it's lasting for a week or 2 weeks of their entire cycle, or even potentially their whole cycle, unfortunately. And there's people who are not diagnosed for like, I think the average in the US is at least 7 years that they go from provider to provider, not actually being diagnosed with endometriosis. I'm not saying that just because you have menstrual pain, you have endometriosis, but if you're having that level of intense, extreme, incapacitating pain, and your provider is not giving you some sense of like a direction to go in, go check out another provider. I highly recommend it. That's important. Like I said, the cyclic breast or chest pain, a little bit of discomfort premenstrually can be totally normal. Just a little bit, you like notice your breasts or your chest just kind of like starting to have a little bit of fibrous tissue. Some people have that more often than others, but what that can show is that there might be like a holding on to more hormones essentially in the body and not kind of like getting them out. So these kinds of things are helpful. It's just helpful information. Gives us more clues into what is happening. Clots in your menstrual bloods. In an ideal world, we want our menstrual blood to be the bright red. You know, you basically like start bleeding. You might have a little bit of spotting. You start bleeding. It's a bright red color. It's essentially fluid. You're not like having lots and lots of clots. Although it can be fairly normal. Small little clots are fine. But once they're larger than a quarter, that's giving some information. So that's helpful information to know. And then you just want it to be flowing. And then, you know, it kind of like flows. Maybe there's a little bit of like on and off towards the end because that's sort of normal and natural, but it stays red for the most part throughout. And then by the time you're done, you're done. What we don't want to see, we don't want to see spotting in your luteal phase. If there's any spotting in your luteal phase, that's something that is really good to pay attention to as well. And that's just like a little bleeding or spotting. Definitely something to look into. But what often happens is that there can be brown blood earlier on, and that is something to take note of. And there can be brown blood at the end. And that's something to take note of. So there's just good information. It's not like there's something horribly wrong at all. It's often just like the position of the uterus or just like needing more pelvic circulation. But these are things that can be helpful. Significant bleeding, like menstrual flooding, like you were saying, you're bleeding so much. Like some people end up having to go to the ER because they're bleeding so much. That's a time to like pay some attention to what's going on. Or if there's just like really a lot of blood coming out. Insomnia, sleep problems, especially in the second half of your cycle, if that's happening, there's probably an imbalance happening there. Very light bleeding. If you're only bleeding for 1 or 2 days and it's super, super light and it's just a light pink, that's definitely something to look into. You might be having anovulatory cycles. There's a lot here. And yeah, if you're having a lack of ovulation. So if you are tracking your cycles and you're not actually ovulating, you notice, oh, that's not happening, but I am bleeding a little bit. It might be just like a breakthrough bleed type of thing happening. That's just like because your uterine lining is building up forever. It's like basically you might have a tiny bit of bleeding, but it's not a full menstruation. Definitely something to look into. There's a grouping of some imbalances.
Yeah, no, that's so helpful. And I mean, there was definitely some things pinging. I was like, okay, because I feel like the more conversations I have with people, they're like, oh, well, this is just the way it is. And you know, and I'm like, okay. I mean, I feel like maybe investigate a little bit. Like I was saying before, having the awareness is really the first step. And then it's just trying to figure out what can help. And while I can't say that I have endometriosis or anything of the level of that or PCOS, but I will say that when I began to kind of reel my energy in at the end of my luteal phase before my menstruation, a lot of my menstrual symptoms went away. It was like my body was like, slow down. but like I was saying before, my energy is high. I can do a lot. And because I wasn't listening to my body when it was saying, like, yes, we can get a lot of stuff done in this time period, but you need to listen to the signs of like, hey, menstruation's coming, you need to pull back a little bit. I would have intense menstrual symptoms when I wasn't listening. And so I think it's just, again, having that awareness and saying, wow, I feel extra tired. My period's not here yet, but this might be a good time to rest, or this might be a good time to take my home and work life tasks and make them come back a little bit so that I can nourish myself a little bit more.
I love that. I think especially for people who don't have major imbalances going on, definitely, especially like if you're feeling moody, if you're feeling tired, if you're experiencing menstrual cramps, but it's not to such an incapacitating place that you're passing out, then yeah, absolutely. Cycle syncing lifestyle, like you share about on your podcast and just I know is really, really important to you. As I've been tracking my cycle for so long, I just listen. I've just learned to listen more and more because I'm just like, oh, that's where I'm at. You know, it's okay for me to feel this way. I'm going to just respond to it. And knowing that everybody is a little different. I think one of the things that's a little challenging about the cycle syncing movement that's out there is that people are like, oh, in the follicular phase, you're going to feel this. And then in your ovulatory phase, you're going to feel this. But some people actually, when they ovulate, have a little bit of cramping and feel a little fluish. Like that can be a thing. So for some people, it's not going to be their time to like be in the limelight. It might be better for them to do that in their follicular phase or in their early luteal phase, even right after they ovulate. So I think it is about, like you're saying, like listen to your own body. You can get some guidance from the concept of cycle syncing and then just really respond to like, what is your body asking for? And then the more we respond, including food, like we need more calories and also carbohydrates, especially in our luteal phase than we do in our follicular phase. So it's like actually listening. I'm not saying go eat some sugar. I'm saying like sweet potatoes, you know, like eat some healthy carbohydrate. We need more of them in our luteal phase. A lot of people are just like eating exactly the same thing throughout. And that can be a challenge too. So I think all of it, like lifestyle, food, relationship to yourself, paying attention to your cycle, all of that feels important in terms of really encouraging more optimal menstrual health throughout the cycle. Yeah. And it's not going to fix everything.
Definitely.
If you've got like major imbalances, there's probably a little more to support you that's more targeted. So you can target more if you got major imbalances happening. But like inflammation is such a huge piece of the puzzle, honestly, for so many of us. And we live in an inflammatory world, essentially. Like, so there's tons of things that are contributing to that. But if we're able to respond to our bodies, to rest, to give ourselves good foods, colorful foods, support ourselves even more, the inflammation that happens that's natural actually around our menstrual cycle, because there is like our prostaglandins are being activated and there's just like a little bit of inflammation that's happening because of course our uterine lining is letting go. It's like a thing that's happening. So the body's responding to that. There's a natural inflammation that happens, but the more that we can kind of encourage this easeful, cooling movement, the better we can feel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's understanding the energetics of our body and not forcing ourselves to do things that don't feel good, for sure. And that's been like a lesson in my journey of it, of like not thinking I need to be on and do all the things all the time. But yeah, it's a personal, subjective thing. Just like you were saying, with the grounding foods, that was a huge thing that changed in the support of myself. And thinking back of when I first started to get my period, I passed out all the time. Like there was just so many things that were leading toward just like not caring for my body in the right way. And knowing that like I had some eating disorders at that time. And like I was just depriving myself of like basic human care. And that fully was affecting my cycle. It's paying attention. I really appreciate all the wisdom that you've brought on. Welcome to Flouractivity, the channel that guides you on a transformative journey towards spiritual wisdom, self-development, and healing practices, all aimed at elevating your intuition and aligning you with your soul's purpose. I'm your host, Kara Dempsey, and I'm thrilled to have you joining me as we learn together. Please subscribe and share this with a friend to help grow my channel. I appreciate you, and we'll chat soon.